Hello, I'm the theorizer, and yes, it's time to revisit Coraline again. You must watch parts 1, 2, 3, and 4 in order, otherwise this video won't make sense. But before we get into today's video, I'd like to give a bit of a recap on what's happened in the past few months. Back in October, I posted the first actual theory, as far as I know, on the whole internet, analyzing the actual plot of Coraline. I used a plethora of evidence to deduce that the old well is actually a portal to the other world. A couple days later, part 2 was released. In it, I pointed out a lot of Easter eggs and secrets that the film had to offer. Then, a few days after that, part 3 was released. In this 10-minute video, I explained the timeline of Coraline, how the 3 ghost kids came to the house and were killed. I did, however, incorporate a half-baked theory into it, so really part 3 is just good for its timeline. And then, I waited several months. I realized that my 3 Coraline videos were the most popular on my channel, primarily because I shared them to Reddit, and Reddit users loved how I brought back the forgotten movie. And so, naturally, I created part 4. I made it in May 2016. This 15-minute analysis is one of my most in-depth theories on this channel. Having 50,000 subscribers and 1 million views. I had pretty much brought Coraline back from 7 years of it being dormant. Then, the video started getting thousands upon thousands of mini-theories in the comments section. Then, the Coraline Wiki accepted my theory as canon, and the wiki was flooded with my theory, each page taking a bit of it. But they did give credit, so I guess that's fine. Then, I noticed a couple of other YouTubers taking what was now on the wiki and reposting my theory with a couple of personal changes. Naturally, I was a bit miffed that they didn't give me any credit, as I came up with all of it, but I guess it's okay. But what happened next was crazy. More and more Coraline reviews and discussions all of a sudden flooded YouTube after I posted my video. And now, we're in August, and it is time for the single most heavily requested analysis on my channel to date, Coraline Part 5. I must say, this won't be easy. Don't go and rage in the comments if it's not as good as Part 4. But basically what I've done in the past few months is rewatch this film over and over, trying to extract more and more information from it. I've noticed many new Easter eggs, secrets, and chunks of evidence to add to Part 4, and so I have lots to add to my previous theories. So without any more unnecessarily obnoxious further ado, here's what I've got. I have found a bit more evidence to support the well theory, or should I say, you guys did. Many of you told me about this, and when I searched it up for clarification, it was very accurate. There is a ring of mushrooms that surround the well, known as a fairy ring. These things are known in folklore as magical entry points, and they generally just represent magic. They are dangerous and hazardous places. They grow in dead areas as well. The beldam also kidnapped a fairy in the books, so the fact that fairy rings are entirely associated with magic and entrances almost skyrocketingly confirms my theory on the well. And maybe the beldam didn't fall down the well, maybe it was calling to her, but more on that in a minute. Now let's hop into the other world. The other mother is clearly a spider fan for reasons I'm not too sure of yet, but the point is, the other world's wallpaper is patterned spiders. But what's interesting about this is the primary wallpaper in the real world is also that same spider pattern. This fact even further proves my Grand Dame theory, as it would make sense for the same wallpaper to cover both sides of the house if she lived there to begin with. And something shocking I noticed when looking at the walls was that there's a painting in the other world of the Pink Palace. It's a very old looking painting, and the house in the picture has a blue sky, meaning it's daytime, meaning it's the real world, meaning that beldam has a painting of the real world in a world where she's clearly passionate about nighttime and buttons, meaning that she has it for a reason. Everything she creates is created in the image of the other world. So since this image isn't at nighttime, it means that she actually had this painting in the real world, which means that she did live in that house. And that strongly supports my Grand Dame theory. But if you don't believe me with that, there is another very old-fashioned painting on one of her walls. It is of an old-fashioned town with an old-fashioned car in it. Ashland, perhaps? That would make sense if she lived in Ashland like I stated in part 4. And speaking of paintings, I don't know if this is significant or not, but when reflected in the mirror, this picture isn't the same as the one reflected. But let's move on from paintings and pictures, and let's get into portals. There were some people in part 4's comment section that weren't believing there were other portals. In part 4, I mentioned that there were miniature ones that the mice take, and that the cat also takes to easily get from world to world. But if you still don't believe me that he does use portals, then how does this happen? Coraline enters the door for the 3rd time, and he watches her do so. Then, he suddenly appears in a window in the other world, and then, around the backyard, he starts talking to her. So he clearly used a portal right there. So that should remove any suspicions. Also, look at some of the Coraline title art used in movie promotions. The cat is the L, and it appears as though he's emerging from a rectangular light source, like a portal. Although that might not be the case, it's still pretty convincing. But now, let's get into my really good theories. The question on everybody's mind after part 4 was this. Coraline sent the key down the well. Does that mean the beldam got it? Yes, it does mean that. Almost immediately after that scene, we are introduced to the first and only grand sweep of the entire backyard, where we see the beldam's face imprinted in the garden, almost as if she's still there and she received the key. Then we sweep out to the cat, who uses a portal, something only usable if the other mother, the one who added more portals, is still alive. And just the way that they show this shot where the cat disappears and then a dramatic thud occurs. It's kind of oddly presented. We already know that he uses portals, so what is so dramatic about this? Then you realize that the dramatic thud was to symbolize that if he can take a portal like this, then the other world is still there. So yes, the beldam got the key. And Coraline, of course, didn't know that, and neither did the cat, as remember, he was just her first victim, and naturally, he wouldn't know about the well. But I also get asked, then why does the hand try to pull her away from the well and back to the door? To that, I say, she didn't want the well opened, she wanted the door opened, and it needs to be opened from the real side. Here's a quick thing I absolutely have to talk about. One of the only holes in my last theory was how the beldam got her magic in the first place. You know, to initially create the doll in the world. I always was a little disappointed because it was a tiny hole with a huge impact on the analysis. But then, just as I started writing this, a commenter known as the Magical Kittens stated that their friend had figured it out. The first batch of life to start everything came from the beldam herself. She used her own soul to literally create the world. Her button eyes can be explained by this as well. They are the window to the soul, correct? Exactly. And the reason she can't leave the world is not only because she would deteriorate due to age and no magic, but because she is now physically bound to the other world, and she steals souls because she has none of her own. And so, that fills a huge hole in part 4. Thanks, Magic Kittens. But while on the topic of commenter theories, I think that another really good point made by a commenter was by LPS Everdeen. This person said something rather ingenious. This person said that the key is a button that sews the fabrics of the two worlds together. That's more of a symbolic connection, not plot related, but it is a genius observation nonetheless, so thanks for that intriguing point. And now for what I believe is either the best or most odd thing I realized. In part 4, I discuss how there's a bit of evidence to say that the cat was human before, and that he was the beldam's true first victim, but he escaped. Well, prepare to maybe or maybe not have your mind blown. I came to the sudden realization that this grandmother is African American. Okay, so that in itself isn't mind-blowing, but what is when you realize that the cat is black and is voiced by an African American. There are only 2 characters in the film that are of this nationality. They live in the same area, seem to have similar knowledge, and are both clearly connected. How? Well, I think maybe, just maybe, that before the cat died when he was human, he had children. Let's see. He grew up, and when he was in his 30s or 40s, had twins with a wife, those kids being the grandma and her sister. The time matches up bang on. The grandma said that she grew up living in the Pink Palace, meaning that they were born there. And if this guy did escape, He'd most likely be terrified of the house and keep it under his protection once his parents died. We do see, however, 2 children perish in the Pink Palace during this time, meaning he didn't own the house at that time. His parents did, and he didn't tell them about the beldam, of course, so they rented it out, inadvertently killing 2 children. When he did inherit it in the mid-1900s, he'd have tried protecting his children, but we see with one of them, he fails. He then later on dies, and in the early 2000s he is brought back to protect his grandson to make up for the lost daughter. Notice how the cat is the one who gives Coraline the twin's soul when she loses it. No, seriously, during Coraline's final trip to the otherworld, he suddenly disappears when they are both in the portal. Where the heck did he go? Then he suddenly appears right when Coraline loses the twin's soul. Ominous. And maybe I'm looking layers and layers into this, but the deeper you get, the more interesting. For this cat-dad theory, there is little evidence, but no debunking facts, so it's pretty cool. The grandma says she doesn't like to rent the house out to families with kids, yet she rents it out to Coraline's family. Her grandson is now of age for the beldam to want him, about 10, and she rents it out for his protection, sacrificing someone else's kids. Who do you think boarded up the well and made rumors about seeing a sky full of stars from the bottom? The grandma knew what her family had gone through, and she did those things. But please realize that this cat-dad theory is just a thought. It is not a part of my grand analysis, so until I find more evidence, don't associate it. But we have to move on to the next point now. What several people have questioned me on is about the well. If the beldam found it, how was it there in the first place? Well, the thing is, the well itself isn't the portal, the water at the bottom is. But the whole area around the Pink Palace is very supernatural, as seen by chain reactions, such as when she drops the pebble and it begins to rain. And so I'm not entirely sure of the well's origin. This whole area is very supernatural, and I have complete confidence in saying that it's because of the portal. Now, stay with me on this, but it almost looks like it's a large object that fell from space and crashed through the ground, creating a vertical tunnel with a portal at the bottom. After all, the other world is most likely in another dimension, something probably accessible via outer space. But although that works, I don't really want to dwell on this point. But although it isn't fully baked yet, it does make sense. But now, what you've all been waiting for. Another big, creepy, bombshell, mind-blowing theory. And yes, I do have one here. And it's very creepy. All of the questions I asked in Part 4, I figured could be explained by a dream theory, that it was all a dream. But no, it can be explained by something else, something better. And this is very creepy. All of those questions I asked could be summed up by the fact that the beldam has control over the real world. And that's where things take a downright horrifying turn for the worse. When Coraline moves in, fog and mist engulfs the city as if it's hiding ominous secrets. And when it appears that they destroyed the beldam, the clouds part in the shape of her hands for the first time since Coraline arrived. But then of course we're made aware that she is still there. But what can this theory sum up? The doll following Coraline into town to check on what she liked? Summed up. The extra portals created in a door, behind a sign, etc. Summed up as well. The doll suddenly appearing in the trunk? The beldam has control? That can happen. It's almost as if the magic of the other world is seeping out the portals. This whole thing seems a bit too suspicious, but I'd say for me that the swirling clouds signify the beginning of her reign of terror. Notice how when the clouds swirl and Coraline moves in, the grandma wants Wybie to stay away. This is all too creepy. The odd case of the disappearing parents? Summed up. The magic legitimately shown in the real world via a normal mirror? Summed up. Erased memories? Also summed up. The beldam has control over the real world, just like a grand dame would. No, seriously, if you don't believe me, we see magic everywhere. The mirror is just one example. How about the moving doll? How about the nocturnal transport? This is the real world. How is there magic? It's the beldam. She has the control. And I'm still not too sure of this, but I think I might have actually seen the blurred image of the doll in town. But that, of course, is still a maybe. So basically, this is like a dream theory in the way that it sums everything up. Except this is actually pretty legitimate, and legitimately terrifying. The creator of a city continues to watch over Ashland with excessive clouds to block out the truth. But what does fog represent? Well, it's considered to represent the unknown and the uncertainty of the future. It's considered to hide something, usually the truth. No, seriously, fog represents the hiding of a truth. Not even kidding. And mist symbolizes distorted vision and perception. Wow, so these writers know what they're doing. And I can't forget the point you've all been asking. Does the beldam take the form of all mothers? And yes, she does. Her third and final form is what she truly looks like after her 150 years. You can still see that she sounds a bit like Coraline's mom, but that's because it's her real voice and shape. Behind the scenes, Terry Hatcher isn't trying to be the mother or even the other mother, she's trying to be the beldam. So she has altered her voice as best she can, giving it a bit of an old-fashioned accent. And when developing the character, they made her look very different from the other mother's first form. Some of you keep asking if the Coraline and beldam are related. First, the beldam's true form appears slightly like Mel Jones. Second, their voices. And third, the garden in the backyard can look like Coraline and the beldam. But this is probably the biggest stretch I've seen yet, and I just cannot accept this theory. And another question. Can the beldam predict the future? And my final answer is no. And this intro scene, it does not take place 50 years before the rest of the movie like I said in part 4. It just doesn't. YB only told Coraline that it was in his grandma's trunk, he said nothing more, meaning since the beldam has control over the supernatural area, what with all the magic seeping portals, she could have easily put it into the trunk, so yeah. Also, something you guys question frequently is why do the rats know Bobinski? Here is the thing, they do not. His mice are taken by the beldam to serve her, and they know the truth, so the ones that aren't taken remain with Bobinski and they know about everything. Another thing, the beldam goes after one person at a time, but no adults allowed. They aren't easy to manipulate, so they're not allowed. Children are, but only one at a time, as the beldam can only satisfy the needs of one child at a time. And also, why only one key? And my answer to that is because she needs to give the children a sense of trust and free will to go to her world. And making another key would just be useless to her, as she wouldn't be allowed to go to the real world anyways. The final point I'm going to bring up today is the question on many people's minds revolving around what I called the soul sand in part 4. Minecraft coined the term, and I thought it was directly applicable to what the beldam was doing. In the movie, the soul sand is magical sawdust made from souls that applies the life of the souls to all the creatures the beldam fills with the soul sand. She then controls them. But what about the other YB and the other father? They seem to have free will. And the point I made to the commenters was that the amount of sand also mattered. And that makes sense. If a creature made by the beldam has a little amount of soul sand in it, then it can be granted life, and its lack of much of a soul makes it easy to manipulate. The large bugs in the beldam's study, the tiny animals, the taffy woman, Bobinski filled with tiny rats, etc. The beldam doesn't need to waste a ton of soul sand on extra characters, but for people like the other father or other YB, she needs to fill them with soul sand as they are actually loving ones, and doing this makes them more emotionally self-aware than the rest. And keep in mind that these souls are legitimately the ones the beldam took from these kids, so the fully filled souls know the truth, and try to help Coraline rather than just mindlessly obeying their creator. This also applies to why some characters can't leave the other world. The small characters can go all over as they have a tiny amount of residual magic, but the larger ones need a supporting world. And as far as the beldam goes, if her whole body, not just a hand, leaves the other world, her old age will cause her to instantly break down due to a magicless environment. And with her gone, all of her creations would die, and the extra portals would collapse, leaving only the well and a blank spatial void awaiting command, availably accessible by the bottom of the well. So most of those were just ideas and not actually theories. However, the fog one was kind of a theory and the sand one was kind of a theory, but, you know. So I'm not done with Coraline at all. It's just that this is getting obscenely lengthy. I will probably make another video on it before 2017. I just want you guys to comment any questions you have, because when you do, it makes me look at the film in new ways and completely reveal massive truths about it. So thanks for that. I mean, there's still things I want to discuss, like why there's cotton in the doll to begin with, and what's with the beldam's obsession with games and tapping her fingers and her button twinkly eyes. I don't know, but I will cover that whenever I get the chance to. And until next time, I'm the Theorizer.